Most people struggle with weight loss or the ability to stick to any meal plan, exercise plan, or even completing a project or being motivated to work out or having more energy because they have low baseline dopamine levels. In other words, they have low numbers of D2 receptors in their brain. D2 receptors are the dopamine receptors in our brain that set the tone for our mental health, our mood, our energy levels, our productivity, our motivation. You want high levels of baseline dopamine levels because the higher your baseline dopamine level is, the happier you are, no cravings, more motivation, more energy, and more productivity, better memory, all the things that we want. This is an exciting study. It's not new, but it's worth shedding light on how food restriction can increase D2 receptors or can increase baseline dopamine levels in obese rats. So this was from Brookhaven National Laboratory. The scientists found that genetically obese rats, as we already know, that if you are overweight or obese, you will have lower baseline dopamine levels because you're probably eating a lot of addictive foods, and substance use, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs, is going to destroy our D2 receptor numbers and is going to drop our baseline dopamine. But also, people who tend to spiral into addiction are usually born with less amount of D2 receptors just naturally as compared to others who tend to be more resilient and have higher numbers of D2 receptors. And I'm sure there are additional causes that we don't really have a lot of control over that dictate how much D2 receptors we have in our brain, like environmental exposures, environmental toxins, and things like that. So the scientists in this study found what we already see all the time is that even in cases of obesity or overweight, you have lower D2 receptor numbers. And so in these genetically obese rats, they had lower levels of dopamine, D2 receptors, as compared to lean rats. We also have those same brain scans. You can Google that in humans, and you can see addicted humans or overweight humans compared to a normal or lean person or somebody without addictions. They will have the same brain scans. The obese rats had less red as compared to the lean rats. You see here the color scale. The red part here means the highest concentration of D2 receptors, and orange means a little bit less D2 receptor concentration, and so on and so forth. And so you want to see a lot of redness on those scans. Specifically, those are autoradiograms. Those are only done on deceased rats. You can't do that in a living organism. They're similar to PET scans that we do in humans, though. And so you can see in obese rats, they had less redness as compared to lean rats, meaning the obese rats had less D2 receptors as compared to the lean rats. Now, in the study, they also demonstrated that restricting the food intake of rats increased their numbers of D2 receptors, partially attenuating a normal decline associated with aging. Normally, as you age, aging breaks down every system in your body. This is why you start getting sick, because we start losing our resilience, and chronic diseases start to accumulate, which is the downstream effect of aging. The brain also starts to get more depressed and starts to have less D2 receptors. The more you age, generally speaking, the less D2 receptors you have. In this study, they showed that by restricting food intake of the rats, they were able to counter that drop in D2 receptors. Also, you can see here in the obese rats with unrestricted food access, they had almost no D2 receptors because those are at the 4-month mark. So this scan is at the 1-month mark, and then at the 4-month mark, that means the rats aged 4 months. And so you can see as part of aging, you start seeing drops in D2 receptor numbers. And but in the obese rats that were restricted to food, so they only gave them 70%. In other words, the restricted food access group gave them 30% less food. You can see that they had more D2 receptors. And in the lean rats at the 4-month mark, you will see lean rats at the 1-month mark, more D2 receptors, at the 4 months mark because of aging, a little bit less D2 receptors. And now in the lean, if they're lean and you also restrict food access, you see a little bit more D2 receptors, not that much more though. What that shows is that things like pushing your first meal of the day, or maybe doing certain types of fasts that are, I know, uncomfortable to sometimes implement, but they can also raise your D2 receptor numbers. If you cannot work out the way that I generally recommend for people to do in order to raise their D2 receptor numbers, food restriction is another way that you can raise your D2 receptor levels. Also, eating healthier is going to increase D2 receptor numbers, especially something like a carnivore diet, because it doesn't have any addictive or hyperpalatable food. I will send you a free copy of my guide, the 30-day Carnivore Challenge Guide, when you sign up to my newsletter at drzaldivar.com/newsletter. And if you are intrigued about this whole protocol on how to raise your baseline dopamine level, I explain that in my guide, Dopamine Brain. It outlines the brain rehab protocol that I follow to lose 30 pounds and maintain it, and also that I recommend to my clients. Now, I highly recommend getting the Dopamine Brain along with the two other guides, Monster Mindset and Monster Mind, the supplements. Those three guides together, they're all under the Brain Bundle. It's so much cheaper to get them all three together as opposed to get them individually. Each one of them attacks a different way to raise your baseline dopamine level and increase D2 receptors. Because if you're not interested in fasting, you could do things like exercise, as I outlined in Dopamine Brain. You could do certain types of visualization that I've introduced called energy versus training visualization. I explain how that works in Monster Mindset. You can increase dopamine by 65% in a single session, and then over time your baseline dopamine starts to increase with more sessions, and you get better at those types of energy and training visualizations. And then the supplement guide, all three of them attack different ways of raising baseline dopamine. I highly recommend doing all of the things, especially the Dopamine Brain protocol, the exercise protocol, and the Monster Mindset protocol, which includes the visualizations. Those are very powerful ways to increase baseline dopamine levels, probably above and beyond what fasting and food restriction can do. We don't really have those studies that would pit those two protocols against one another, but it would make sense that if you're going to run a lot, for example, you're going to need more nutrition. So food restriction wouldn't be very helpful. And at some point, food restriction is going to have a certain upper limit. How much more restriction of food can you afford before you hit a maximum amount of baseline dopamine elevation? Whereas with exercise, if you can exercise, there's really no limit to how much you can raise it. And I talk more about all of those things in other videos. And you can check out those guides on drzaldivar.com/shop. And for one-on-one coaching with me, it's drzaldivar.com/coaching. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this type of content, let me know in the comment section below, and make sure you share this information with friends and family if you feel like it might be helpful to them. And let me know that you enjoyed this type of content so I can film additional similar content by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing, and hitting that little notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.